Good afternoon and welcome to episode 12 of Inside Out, a monthly webcast where Thinka's co-founders and respective COO and CEO, Ben and Lee, talk through all the weird and wonderful, hard and human parts of business and leadership. This month we're exploring doing more with less in L&D, and we're focusing on two big questions. My budget is tight and I have a small L&D team. How can I still build high impact learning? And in big organizations, how do you get leaders on board with learning?
We've been talking a lot to clients, to prospects, people coming through, and they've been revealing, some common themes. So, a lot of organizations at the moment are going through big restructures. There's return to office mandates happening, digital transformations. Not only that, but they're also managing, obviously, AI and automation rolling out alongside increased pressure around regulatory changes. So, right to disconnect, psychosocial risks, all of those things. So it's quite a complex workplace that we're dealing with in this day and age. And not to mention some of the economic pressures as well. Obviously, there's been a bit of a fallout after COVID. So in COVID, we were all madly pivoting to online learning and creating resources around how we meet online, how we work online, how we interact in learning experiences online more of the time. And then there was this big sort of reconnection piece after COVID where we pivoted back the other way and created all of this face-to-face contact and learning experiences that would leverage that and kind of respond to that need. I think that has all died down. And then we were kind of left with this piece around, potentially tighter budgets, smaller teams, fewer resources, and yet a more complex workplace. So now we're stuck in this really unique challenge where we're having to do more with less, which is what this is all about. And I guess we've kind of whittled it down to what we call the 5 A's. Alignment, getting alignment with what the biggest business priorities are is really important. So that's the first A. Applying universal design is the second A, and how we can get the best bang for buck by appealing to the biggest audience. AI is the next piece, how we can use AI to speed up processes, to remix content, to personalize the learning for people. Accountability in leaders. And I feel like there's a lot of missed opportunities in organizations to connect with leaders and help them kind of be the vehicle of learning more of the time. It can be a challenge to cascade down the learning. So thinking about ways that we can do that. And then that active learning culture. How do we get people inspired and empowered to upskill kind of off their own back or engage, with new technologies or kind of see into the future and look at what they can do to learn.
Attaching to strategic need or aligning to strategic need, when we think about the L&D agenda historically, we haven't always had a seat at the table when it comes to actually understanding really what that strategic priority is and how the business needs to change in order to achieve that strategic priority. So being amongst the conversation is going to be critical. So we should actually know how any program or any initiative that you run actually helps deliver on that need. So if I think about where we've been over the last 5 years, and you mentioned it before, Lee, the response to COVID is how do we just make sure that we potentially at that moment in time retain our talent or attract talent, or how do we provide the right environment to learning within that moment? But specifically here, I'm going to talk about an example around talent retention. So post-COVID and up until recently, there's been a real war on talent in some organizations and some industries. And an organization that we work with recently in construction really put this great program together that was really designed at making sure that they both attracted and retained top talent and that they were actually ready for the future and the different types of roles that might be available in the future. So that for everyone might be sounding like a more traditional leadership program where they're put onto it because they're seen as high potential talent. And yes, it was that, but it was more. It was looking at the future need as not being so specific that it is a conveyor belt of future leaders, for want of a better term. The next one is ready and succession is therefore fulfilled, but it is a network of talent of people that can move between projects, between roles really easily. If leadership is an option, that we've got the bank of skills that we actually need. And that
Yeah.
speaks a lot to the future of talent, and the future of developing talent is not just the next person is ready to succeed into leadership, or the next high potential crop is ready. It's actually, do I have the right network of skills in my organization that if I need to solve a problem based on our strategic need, I can bring those people together. I've got that person that's really great at in-depth critical thinking and problem solving. I've got that person that can lead technical teams. I've got that person who's going to be a great influencer across the organization. That is the team I can put together to do that. And that links to so many different things. We have had so much traditional thinking around capability roles and levels, but it's now starting to go, how does our skills matrix work?
Yeah.
The role.
How do we design for the broadest possible audience? So thinking about being really strategic with our learning solutions and not just kind of firefighting, or we tend to kind of have a scattergun approach to learning some of the time because there's always going to be a priority or a need, or somebody's throwing something across your desk. How do we actually put all that noise aside and go, okay, what is the strategic need, as we've just discussed, but also how do we design it in such a way where we're going to hit the broadest possible audience and not a micro audience, so we can get the most value out of the learning? And I think it's really prioritizing engagement. Like, everyone talks about engaging learning solutions, but what does that actually mean? It just means that the learning is written and represented in a way that speaks to that cohort. So the language makes sense, the tone makes sense, the imagery represents the people that we're talking to. We're not just talking to neurotypical learners, we're thinking about neurodiversity, we're thinking about people with disability, we're thinking about those who have English as a second language, for example. So we're inviting in this accessibility and this ability to appeal to a broader audience from the beginning. And I think that's really important, because if we don't do that and the learning is very one-dimensional, it does kind of cut out our ability for cut through and therefore engagement.
What is its need right now, and what could its legacy be in the future? So when you do that, and if you think about the different tools we've got at our disposal, which is the next A, funnily enough, AI and automation, you can actually take a really well put together program or piece of learning content and then use tools like AI to remix that into different formats that actually meet some of these ambitions that we've got in universal design principles. We don't need to go and manually create all the different formats. If we've created that base level of content, the format creation can actually be done using these different tools. But if we rely on the AI to do the creation of the content, we're surely going to be disappointed because it hasn't had a source of truth to actually pull from. And that is the difference between AI that's very generic and doesn't really give us what we need, to AI that can actually be really credible, therefore incredible, which is we've actually fed it the information to remix the content into a format. And a lot of the time we start with format, whereas we should actually start in the universal design thinking world with what is that base content? What are those written words, or what is that ethos we're trying to convey? And how do I put all that information together and then use some of these tools to then divvy it out into those different formats? This pain point understanding piece is often misunderstood because it feels like it's a really big piece and heavy piece of work. But I want everyone to just think about when they pop into a chemist and the pharmacist asks you a few questions to dig into exactly what you actually need. And they go, oh, is it this or is it that? Is it this? It's that. Okay, that's the pain. So might have a little bit of an understanding, but they ask you the right questions to actually get to what the right medication is to solve that problem. So therefore, prescription to symptom is a type of thinking. And why I share that is because I've had the privilege of working historically with someone who is a pharmacist by trade and has worked in and around Thinka for a long time. And they taught me this art of doing pain point based, mapping in the moment, and think like this to go, actually, how do I just ask enough questions to get them the right medication to solve their problem, rather than having to do war and peace in that moment to get them what they actually needed. AI, we're probably through the hype phase now and we're starting to realize its potential. But what we're also seeing is the fragment of information. So therefore, the fragmentation of credibility in what we're actually getting out of AI. And why is that happening? In very simple terms, AI now feeds itself information. So all the information that's been created over the last couple of years, it now references that information to give you more information. And if its original source material that they created wasn't accurate, then therefore the information they get now might not also be accurate. Because how does the World Wide Web actually work? It works on a really large amount of content that it chews through and references and indexes and de-indexes. And if its credibility is compromised, then sometimes information we get can be compromised as well. So I say that because I want everyone to think about, rather than getting frustrated by the information I'm getting now, how do I actually make sure I'm getting the best possible product if I wanted to use AI into the future? And one of the things that we did at at Thinka, is to develop a tool called Prompter, which meant that we could actually just control its imports, so therefore have a little bit of more control of its outputs. So we've been using it now for a few months, and it can do anything from remix content into a different format right through to reference a particular process. And because we've been able to tell it what information to reference and feed it the information to respond to, the likelihood of an accurate response is much higher. So sometimes that work is great, especially around personalization, because we could have all the ambition in the world to make sure that we turn content into different formats, but all we might need to do is actually just make it accessible through a format where the person could ask it a simple question and then therefore get it what it needs in the flow of work.
Yeah, I think there's definitely so much potential with generative AI tools, and we've only really just scratched the surface. But I think the personalization piece is probably more important for learning, because, for example, if you have a module and you can feed the information from that module into your AI tool and then match it with some data about an individual, and then ask it to draw down what the most important and salient points are from the module that you need to sort of give over in a coaching conversation, that's a really powerful way to use AI. And you don't compromise the learning experience, because, there's obviously this stigma around AI as a learning tool that persists, because there are obviously some cons we need to be aware of. But I think if we use it in the right ways and we take advantage of it for things like personalization, we get the most out of it. If we're thinking about the next kind of A that we are talking about, accountability that sits with leaders, it gives them a tool to be able to personalize the learning very quickly and easily for one-to-ones with their direct reports, or potentially they're going into a team meeting where they need to reference this bit of compliance learning that's come into play, and how do they build a stimulating conversation around it for the meeting. They can get, potentially three prompts to take in that promote that conversation. So I think it helps to empower that accountability piece, but there's also a role for L&D to play in briefing and being very clear with leaders about what their responsibilities are. I feel like sometimes we roll out learning and there's an expectation that leaders know how to pick it up and run with it and integrate it into the team environment. But creating kind of a side profile, if you will, for the leader in terms of how they facilitate that learning ongoing is just as important as the piece of learning itself.
We probably come up against this challenge of leaders already have no time, or leaders, we don't want to put more on their plate, they're already stretched, etc. And we need to first reframe that from the problem of, if we don't actually get them where they need to be in building this active learning culture or having enough to be able to drive that person forward, they're actually just going to have less time. So it's the ability to not push the cart before the horse in this case. Because the thing here is, if we can give the leaders what they need to free up their time, to get a high-performing team around them, to know what to reference and when, we haven't then just got 4 people in our L&D team, we've got 400